By popular demand, we have comprehensible input versus incomprehensible input in today's video. Konnichiwa, watashi no channel e yokoso. And in today's video, we're going to be first of all looking at comprehensible input, which, if you didn't already know, is basically a term coined by Krashen, which is to understand the overall message of the piece of media that you're consuming. It could be a book, or it could be a TV show, a podcast, any other form of listening or reading. They are all forms of input, and for it to be comprehensible, then typically you want to understand around 90% or more of the content that you're consuming. Comprehensible input in general is regarded as a good way to learn a language, because you're just absorbing the language naturally through what's called a language acquisition. Again, I believe that term is coined by Krashen. If you don't know who Krashen is, I will have him linked in the description below. Just a few notes on my take on comprehensible and incomprehensible input that I've just made here in the last 10 minutes or so while thinking about the topic. And by all means, if you want to make any comments, put them down in the comment section below. Comprehensible input could be obtained through a number of different ways, one of which is pictures in a book, which could help direct through the story, and therefore the meaning could be a little bit more clearer when you're trying to read in that language. If you're watching a Netflix TV series, for example, obviously what's happening on screen goes alongside what they're talking about. A lot of the time you can make a good guess as to what they're talking about, even if you don't understand much of the language, and so that can become more comprehensible. If you're at the stage where you are comprehensible and you do already understand 90% or more of what you're reading or listening to, what you're doing is you're acquiring a lot more of that language, and through doing comprehensible input, whether it's reading or watching TV or podcasts or whatever it may be, that comprehensible input slowly is going into you, and your brain is slowly decoding everything that goes in with language. For example, if you're listening to a certain sentence, your brain is going to pick up on subtleties like grammar points and words used and different endings and prefixes and suffixes and all of this other stuff that goes on behind the scenes, which if you're exposed enough to, you will naturally acquire the language. If I was to say to you, for example, a simple sentence in Spanish like El perro corrió por el jardín, then hopefully you can sort of get an idea of what I'm talking about. El perro corrió por el jardín. You can see from that simple example that if you were to do that with, again, like books with pictures, or if you were to do it when you're speaking with people and you say like mi ojo, mis ojos, you could understand a lot through not knowing a lot of the language just because of the actions that they do on screen. So that was just an example of how you could acquire a language through meaning, as opposed to trying to learn and study every individual word and the grammar context. And so again, that's a very simplified way of putting it, but that is essentially how comprehensible input works. If you're at a high enough level, you can read more and rely less, I guess, on visual cues and that kind of thing. By having comprehensible input, it's obviously going to use up a lot more brain power than the alternative, which would be incomprehensible input, which means more focus, more brain activity. More brain activity means that you're going to tire out quicker, as opposed to the incomprehensible, which I'll talk about in a minute. But when you tire out quicker, obviously it means it's a good thing, because I don't know if any of you have ever had this. I'm reading through this book and I get through a chapter and I'm starting to feel fatigued, and I'm starting to feel like I don't want to continue anymore because I'm just too tired. It's hard to focus, hard to think much anymore, and I just want to, if anything, go to sleep. Normally for me personally, I get fatigued to the point of where I just want to sleep. And if that's the case, then that's good, because your brain's working. It's working in another language, because it has to think about every word that you see and every phrase that you see and every grammatical point that you see, even on a subconscious level. It is thinking really hard, as opposed to when you're reading in your native language. So because of that, it tires you out quicker. So you could read only a page or a chapter and you feel a lot more tired than you would in a more dominant language. Therefore, maybe you can only get like a certain amount in. For example, as I just said, maybe a chapter, and you can only get that much in before you get really tired because your brain's just being overworked. However, I also would like to say that comprehensible input obviously is going to be more fun for the individual and more comfortable for the individual. Now, just a few points on the incomprehensible side of things, because I think there are a couple things worth mentioning. First of all, you come across way more new words. So obviously, if you know like so many words, let's say 5,000 words, and then you pick up a new book and it's got like all these other words in there that you've never seen before. If you just read and read and read, and if you want to listen to it as well, or if you watch a TV series and you don't understand anything and it's all just noise, you're obviously coming across new content, new words in that language, which will ultimately help you to learn new words, new phrases. And you're never going to progress in a language if you stick to only comprehensible things. You need a little bit of incomprehensible material, in my opinion, in order to actually build up your vocabulary. And quite often for me, I will do incomprehensible reading, especially on link, but it could be in a physical book as well. And I'll just sit there and I'll just read and read and read and read. If I don't understand it, it doesn't matter. I'm doing my incomprehensible reading right now and I'm just reading. I'm trying to see as much of the language as I can, because whenever you come across a word, whether you're subconsciously or consciously thinking it, that word is going to be stored in your memory. And then when you come across that word again, whether it's a day later or a week later or a month later, you're going to have that very small memory and it's going to trigger again. And then your pathways in your brain are going to start to become bigger and bigger because you've seen that same word. And then the more you see it, the more repetition of those words, the bigger the pathway is going to be, and therefore the better the memory is going to be. And this happens to me all the time with words, but it also happens with other memories as well. It doesn't have to just be language, but as an example, obviously in books, for example, when you're reading words, all the time I'll see a word and I'm like, I swear I've seen that word before. Even easier to track it on link because obviously it won't be highlighted blue as a new word, it'll be yellow for a word I've previously seen. And so I can say, I've definitely seen this word before in some context somewhere before. And you click it again and you say, okay, this is a translation, this time I'll see if I can remember it, and just through enough repetition you'll eventually start to remember. So I think incomprehensible reading definitely has its place because it helps to build vocabulary. Incomprehensible listening, on the other hand, I don't know whether it's as useful. I've trialed incomprehensible listening so many times in all of my languages, and to be honest, like, it has very minimal benefit for me, but I don't know if it's just something that takes a lot longer than what I've already tried. I've tried for years with Spanish for incomprehensible listening. Like, honestly, it helps, I guess, with the pattern of the language in regards to like listening to the sounds of the language, and you can try and repeat the sounds of the language and you can pick up on words and phrases maybe. But there's a lot of times I'll listen to an entire podcast and I just don't understand anything that I've just listened to, and I don't know whether that's all that useful. Whenever you're listening to something, every word that you understand that you can individually pick out, and it's not just a big load of noise, but it's actually words that you can pick out, every phrase that you can understand, every grammatical point. If you can point those things out, then you're slowly pointing out bits in a language which you previously didn't understand, and therefore it's starting to become very slowly more comprehensible. Even if it's going to be at like a 5% or a 10% level, you're still slowly building up that comprehensibility. The complete opposite to what I said about with the comprehensible input, incomprehensible input, i.e. not understanding what you're listening to or reading or watching, it's obviously going to be less comfortable for you, and it's going to be less enjoyable because you don't know what's going on. And so you're going to be sat there listening or reading whatever you're listening to, and you're going to understand almost nothing. It's going to be quite tedious. You're going to start thinking of other things because you don't know what's even going on. At that point, I can't say it's that useful. And if you're really not even paying attention and it is just background noise, then very minimal to zero usage. But it's at that point when maybe you should, like, say, if we're going to do incomprehensible listening, we can only do it for like 10 minutes or 20 minutes at a time before I start tuning out. Because if it's something you can't understand, whether it's listening or reading or whatever, then there's only so long you can like try and keep focus for before you say, I give up because I just don't understand anything that's happening and it's just not fun for me and I need to come back to it later on. The upside sort of to this is that if you can keep up with it, like, I'm quite stubborn with this, and so if I can't understand something, I'll just continue as much as I can. It's less tiring for the brain, in my opinion, because you can't pick up every single word, and so you're just trying to understand what you can, and so you're not focusing so much on every single little detail like you would with comprehensible input. And so I would say personally that I could last longer listening to incomprehensible input than I could comprehensible input. But if I could do, say, 30 minutes comprehensible as opposed to 2 hours incomprehensible, the 30 minutes would be more beneficial than those 2 hours. They still have more benefit 100% than not doing anything in your language. This is Dragon Ball SD first edition or episode or whatever you'd call it with a manga. We open it up, go to like a random page that I've got here, and you can see that you've got pictures alongside a bit of text, and obviously it's Japanese, so it's a lot more difficult for me than say French or Spanish, even if I was at the same like amount of time studying. But I could look at these words on here and I could start to slowly understand maybe some of the words. Hayaku shinaito. So I can read some of the words and I can understand them a little bit in regards to the sounds, but I don't know what they mean. But when I'm reading these, for example, I can just at least replicate the sound and get an idea for that, because I can very slowly read Japanese if they have the furigana, and so if they got the hiragana, katakana alphabets, then I can read very slowly Japanese. These 2 pages will take me probably, if I was to read it now, like 15 minutes or maybe a little bit less, to read through properly and try and get like the pronunciation out. And if I was reading out loud, then yeah, I would say 10 to 15 minutes just to properly like work out how each character is pronounced and how they're pronounced within the word that they're being pronounced in. Sometimes it's easy than others, it's hard to say, but yeah, really good, I guess, bite-sized little manga books, but very difficult. The good thing is that because of the pictures being there and because I've watched the TV show, I know roughly what's going on, and so I can like read the words and get a gist of what they mean, and then obviously if I need to I can use Google Translate to help me understand the meaning. This is mostly incomprehensible input in regards to the text, but more comprehensible input because of the illustrations up on screen there. Again, you can see illustrations are a very big part of it, and I can just read it and then at least guess and understand. And if I was to read this same manga, say 5 or 6 times in a row, then I would probably understand more and more each time that I read the manga, which is at least going to be more useful for me than having something like this, which is a book in Polish. It's actually Harry Potter, The Prisoner of Azkaban in Polish, and it's all just thousands and thousands of words for me to read through, and I could open up and I can try and read sentences and try and understand. After 2 years of learning Polish, most of this book is going to be incomprehensible to me because the level's too difficult for me, and so I just don't understand a lot of it. I don't understand magic spell vocabulary in Polish. What is good is if I read through all of these, at least I would be more exposed to thousands and thousands and thousands of more words I would never have seen previously, and so again, each time I see these words, it's more beneficial for me. All that being said, incomprehensible input has its place for sure. Obviously, comprehensible input is going to be a lot more useful, a lot more powerful for you, a lot more fun, and a lot more comfortable for you in general consuming that media. I'd love to see what you guys say about this topic, so let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Please subscribe for more content like this. Please press one of the 2 end screen videos for more content. With all that being said, yoi ichinichi wo sugoichite kudasai. Ja ne.